Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you are new here, my name is Danielle, and I wanted to create a very quick video on a common misconception that people have when it comes to revision, and it's this idea that you are quote-unquote changing the past. Now, hear me out, okay? Because I know obviously when you hear revision, that's the point, right? When you select a different imaginal act of the past, it technically seems like you are changing the past, right? But I would actually make the argument that this isn't the most accurate way of defining revision, even though it can sometimes be worded in this way. And this perspective that I'm going to share in just a second can actually be very transformative when it comes to actually understanding and applying revision. Because a lot of times when people go to revise something, they think that they have to actually change the past in some way with their imagination. It almost becomes this way of like using your imagination to try and reject what you have experienced or how you've perceived you've experienced like reality, essentially. And what that can cause is unnecessary resistance to what you actually experienced, almost like as a form of rejecting the experience, if that makes sense. When it comes to actually revising the past, a better way to actually start looking at this is not necessarily changing what you have experienced, but rather picking a completely new and different reality with a completely new and different past. In order to understand this, what we have to do is we have to start taking a more energetic perspective of things rather than linear perspective of things. Because from my perspective, like revision doesn't really make sense from a linear perspective. It's not so much that you can't conceptualize it from a linear perspective, but taking a more suspended approach and understanding to revision and even reality selecting or manifesting can be extremely beneficial when it comes to actually applying these manifestation techniques. But when it comes to the more energetic perspective of things, one of the key differences between energetic perspective versus linear perspective is understanding that we are sifting through parallel realities in every single given present moment. And what that means is that technically speaking, your right here and right now, this frame of reality that you are experiencing actually has a completely different path than the previous frame of reality that you experienced. And this is very different from the old linear way of seeing things where we see almost like a singular timeline of events, one past, one present, one future. Instead of reality being laid out like this, when you take a more energetic perspective of things, you start to understand that there are infinite paths that you can experience and there are infinite futures that you can experience as well. Your point of power, where you're actually creating your reality, is in the right here and the right now. The way that I like to think about this is actually very similar to this diagram right here. So here, what we have are a series of timelines, right? So timeline 1, timeline 2, timeline 3. And each timeline has its own past, present, and future, with the present being in the center. In order to understand revision, what we have to understand is that we are actually experiencing in every single different present moment a different timeline, meaning that this frame of reality is going to have a different past than the next frame of reality and then the next frame of reality. The only reason why we aren't sensing this is because the degree of change isn't that significant between these parallel realities. But the point I want to make in today's video is that when it comes to revision, instead of trying to revisit or change your past, the past that you quote unquote remember as being real, instead, see it more like this. You're not actually changing the past you quote unquote experienced. Rather, you're selecting a completely new and different past, or in other words, a different memory of the past. And not because you want to manipulate or change this reality, but rather because you want to shift yourself into a more favorable outcome or a more favorable reality in your current present moment. And so what this means is that you don't need to get rid of this reality or pretend it doesn't exist or pretend it didn't happen. You're not even trying to change it. You're just revisiting a completely new and different memory of the past, a completely new and different imaginal act, one that is favorable for you, and one that gives you your desired result in your present moment. So in other words, you don't need to reject the past. The reason why it can be very helpful to start thinking about revision in this way is because when you start understanding that you're not really changing the past, you're selecting a completely new and different past, and in turn, you're actually shifting into a new timeline where that past is actually true. What this actually does is it takes away the resistance that you may have to this idea that you need to reject or get rid of or even forget what actually happened. You don't need to forget what actually happened. In fact, that's another fear that a lot of people have when it comes to revision. This idea of like, oh my gosh, I need to somehow delude myself into thinking that this thing didn't really happen or this thing did happen in order to revise. Not at all. You always have free will and you're always able to recall what actually happened if you so desire or if you need to do that in your present reality for any reason at all. That was actually a big fear that I had when it came to revision. One of the big reasons why I had like an aversion to it at the beginning. I didn't want to lose the groundness of my reality or, feel like I was like deluding myself essentially when it didn't actually happen. You always have free will and you will always have the ability to recall what you perceive as actually happening if you need to. All right. But the point I want to make in today's video is that you're not actually changing or manipulating the past that you did experience. You're selecting a completely new and different reality, a completely new and different timeline where that past is true for you. And the only reason why you're doing this is because you want to experience something right now in your present moment as different in some way, something that is preferred rather than not preferred. So like I said, it can be very helpful to start seeing revision in this way. If you want like an actual example on how this can like look or how it can play out in your reality, definitely check out my parallel reality story. I kind of see revision as this story, basically. Like every time I revise, I actually see myself as hopping into a different timeline where certain things did or did not happen, but only because I want something different to happen in my current present frame of reality. In the example that I give in that video, I talk about this car problem that I had and how I was like, you know what? I'm going to hop into the reality where this problem didn't even exist in the first place. And then it ended up happening, but it was actually mind blowing for me when it happened. It really solidified my understanding of parallel realities and even this idea of revising the past, like how malleable reality can be when you start using your imagination in these ways. From my perspective, revision is a very advanced technique, not because it's harder, but only because it's a little bit weird and wonky to start applying, because it really requires you to take a more energetic perspective of things. It requires you to start understanding that we're not actually experiencing one timeline. We're actually experiencing and sifting through parallel realities every single billionth of a second. Definitely check out my other revision videos if you want more information on more energetic ways of seeing revision and how to actually go about applying revision. But this was just something that I wanted to point out when it comes to this idea of changing the past. At the end of the day, it's very much down to wording. I don't want to necessarily say that changing your past is the wrong way to go about revision. It's not. It's just a way of wording this use of your imagination. But for me, understanding it in this way, where I'm not actually changing the past, I'm actually just selecting a completely new and different past with a completely new and different timeline, which again, we're already right now, whether we're aware of it or not. This is the very thing that gave me the ability to let go of the reality and the imaginal act of my past that I didn't prefer and start selecting the realities and imaginal acts that I did prefer of my past. All right. So if this resonates with you, definitely try it out. I intend that this video helps someone out there. Definitely let me know what you think about it in the comments below as well. And as always, keep creating, everyone, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.